Yes, I'm Jen, and today we're going to be talking about how maybe monogamy is not the best approach, at least when it comes to product management. All right, so who here has ever heard of the concept of foxes and hedgehogs? A few people, okay. All right, so like a few thousand years ago, this Greek philosopher, Archilochus, said, the fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. And people have interpreted this in various ways over the years. The way I want to talk about today, though, is the interpretation you would find in this book, Thinking Fast and Slow. This is written by Daniel Kahneman. He's a Nobel economist. I'll just tell you right now, if there's one thing you can do to make yourself a better product manager, it is to read this book. It is far more important that you read this book than that you listen to my talk. So this whole book, if you haven't read it, it's basically a survey course in the different cognitive errors that humans tend to make. And there's a whole section on predictions. I will give you the TLDR, which is that humans are terrible at making predictions. And not only are we terrible at making predictions, we're terrible at recognizing that we're terrible at making predictions. We will actually misremember what the prediction was that we made so that it makes it feel like we were right. And this is relevant to all of us because if you think about it, product management is basically making predictions. Okay? You predict that if I make certain changes to my product, that's going to make changes to the behavior of my users, and that in turn is going to make the metrics that I care about move in the direction that I want them to move. Which I can just tell you is really fucking hard. Okay? It's so hard that actually you will get it wrong more than half the time. I guarantee you that's true, and I know there's some in the audience who's thinking, well, yeah, maybe that was true when I was getting started, but like now I really know my shit, I'm great at product management. You're still wrong more than half the time. And if you were robustly A/B testing, you would know that. But there is something you can do that will slightly increase your chances of being right. Again, I can't stress this enough. You're still mostly going to be wrong, but that's OK. And that is, you can stop behaving like a hedgehog and start acting like a fox. What do I mean by a hedgehog? So a hedgehog is basically somebody who has one framework of how they understand the world. So maybe they are a Marxist, and their framework is materialism. Maybe they are a fundamentalist Christian, and their framework is the text of the Bible. It's not really about what your framework is or any sort of evaluation on how good that framework is. It's the fact that you only have one. And just points to anyone in the audience old enough to understand this reference. One of the hallmarks of hedgehogs is that they are just so confident that they are right. And that's because any particular system is going to be internally consistent. So, you kind of can end up having this feeling like, well, I just kind of like plug in the information and and out comes the answer. And again, that tendency of us to forget what we said in the past, forget the times that we were wrong, confirmation bias, we just remember when everything went well, like really reinforces that this is the one way that things work. And because these guys are so confident, this is who you tend to see on the TV news when they want to have talking heads. It's much more fun to have two people arguing with each other who both think the other one is an idiot. In contrast, a fox has many different frameworks that she is using to try and understand what's happening and to make predictions. And sometimes these frameworks will actually contradict each other in what they recommend. So you usually know you're talking to a fox if you're getting a lot of prevaricating. So it's like, well, I think this is going to happen because of this, but actually it could turn out to be this because of that. And another hallmark of a fox, in contrast to a hedgehog, is a fox is constantly changing her opinion as new data comes in. Now, one of the other unfortunate things about human beings is that we often mistake confidence for competence. You can exploit this as a product manager. If you've ever fake it till you make it, you're taking advantage of this. The sad truth, though, is actually it is often the exact inverse of this, because it takes a certain level of competence to understand sometimes how hard a problem is, and therefore that your confidence should be low. Now, what does this mean for all of us as product managers? Well, at many conferences that you would go to, including this wonderful conference, you're going to run into a lot of hedgehogs up on the stage, OK? So people are going to get up, and they're going to tell you about whatever their particular favorite theory is. And oftentimes, these are really good frameworks, right? So they might tell you about aggregation theory, Ben Thompson. They might tell you about jobs to be done. They might tell you about crossing the chasm. I'm actually joking about the last one. That would be at a conference 20 years ago. But hot tip, actually still worth a read. And as they're talking, they're going to give you all these examples of when they use this framework, and it gave them the right answer and led to the right product decisions. The thing you have to remind yourself, because it's really going to sound attractive, is they're not talking about all the times that that framework either would have or did lead them in the wrong direction. Now, that doesn't mean that the thing that they're talking about, their framework, is a bad framework. It just means that you should not take it as your goal to figure out the one way to approach product strategy or product design or development. Instead, you want to think about you're building up a rolodex. Apparently, I like really old school references. But you're building up a rolodex of different approaches that you can use whenever you have a problem that you need to tackle. All right, so in the spirit of rolodexes, I'm not going to give you one way to think about strategy today. I'm going to give you a little peek into my rolodex. And in preparation for this talk, I started writing down all the different frameworks that I like to use. There were a lot of them. Obviously, we don't have time to talk about all of these because this would be like a 5-week course. But I'm going to focus today on 3 that I like. But please keep in mind, these are not the only things that I use. These are just 3 examples of things I happen to find useful. And the first one is jobs to be done. So jobs to be done, if you're not familiar, is this idea that you want to move away from thinking about the specifics of what your product does, and you want to focus instead on the problems that it is solving for your end user. I love using this framework when I'm trying to set high-level strategy or look for gaps in what my product is delivering and potentially new markets I could go after. So my lovely introducer mentioned that I'm at Square right now. I joined the Payroll team. And Square Payroll, this is a product. It's for small businesses in the US and Canada. And basically, it's an online payroll provider. It takes care of, you upload the time cards of what your employees have worked. It's going to cut all the checks and do direct deposit. And it's also going to fill out all your tax forms and file them. If you have never done business in the United States, I will tell you, we have a terrible tax code. It is awful. It is complicated. There's all these different levels you have to worry about. There's all these forms you have to that you have to file, and if you file them wrong, there can be pretty substantive penalties. There's, in fact, a very real tax in the economic sense to doing business in the States because of this. And so you can imagine that one of the things a small business owner might be hiring Square Payroll to do is to make sure they don't screw up their taxes. Now, under jobs to be done, once you figure out what you're being hired for, and so in this particular case, we're going to talk about being hired around taxes, you want to think, well, great, what else could my user hire to solve that same problem? And obviously, they could hire one of your competitors. And it's useful to think about how you stack up against them in terms of solving this problem. But really, the power of this framework comes out when you start thinking about other substitutes. So instead of hiring an online payroll provider, a small business could hire an accountant, right? The accountant can do the same thing. They could also hire a book on how to run payroll and how taxes work so that they could learn how to do it themselves. And to be honest, they could also hire paying their people off the books so they don't have to file taxes. There is a segment of users that if I want to win them over, I have to convince them that it is better to be paying taxes through Square than it is to not be paying taxes at all. And that's really where the power of jobs to be done comes through, is because it really gives you this benchmark to understand what you're actually competing against beyond the other people who are obviously in your space. I think this is a super powerful framework, and I love it, but I will tell you, it doesn't cover everything. And in one place it super falls down on the job on is, now that I've figured out what my product should be doing, well, how the heck should I price it? Jobs to be done will not tell you this. If you want to understand pricing, okay, now we got to get it into the world of economics. Okay, this is Adam Smith, you know, the invisible hand of the market. And you can start with economics of thinking about some things like supply and demand curves. This is that like stuff you probably learned in Econ 101. When the price goes up, demand goes down, vice versa, right? There is a critical underpinning of classical economics, which is what this stuff comes out of, which is the rational actor. Okay, the rational actor is a fancy way of saying that all of us as consumers or as business owners are always operating in our own best interest. And the thing that a consumer is trying to do is they are trying to maximize their return on investment. They're trying to maximize the utility that they can buy with the resources that they can bring at hand. The problem with classical economics and the rational actor is, in order to truly optimize the utility that you're getting, when you're thinking about a purchase decision, it's not enough to say, oh, like, am I getting more utility than cost? You have to also figure out, well, is there some other thing I could buy instead that I would get even more bang for my buck, better cost benefit? And in order to do that, you can imagine to like perfectly optimize, you'd have to evaluate every other option that exists to see what the best one, which in and of itself would be a huge sink of resources. So you get this kind of like Heisenberg uncertainty principle of economics that as you approach perfect optimization of cost benefit, your cost benefit actually goes down because the cost of the analysis itself starts to swamp whatever it is that you're buying. And that is, by the way, the actual equation of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Fortunately, your brain is here to help you, okay? It has a solution for this, and the solution is heuristics, okay? All these things your brain has figured out that will get you within striking distance of perfect optimization for a lot less computing power. But like all shortcuts, heuristics sometimes break down. And there is a discipline of economics that I personally love called behavioral economics. It's about all the times that these heuristics make people behave in ways that are suboptimal or even downright weird. I mine this vein so often. And frankly, like, again, we could spend weeks and weeks talking about all the things that have been discovered in behavioral economics. I'm just going to talk about one today. But like, please go research this, because there's so much there. The thing we're going to talk about right now, though, is something you might even have heard of before, which is anchoring. Has anyone here ever taken like a negotiations class and you learned about anchoring? Yeah. So this is familiar. The reason I bring it up, even though it's going to be familiar, is I think it's actually pretty instructive to think about what is the underlying mechanism that is going on with anchoring, and therefore how can you leverage that as a product manager. All right, so let's think about what's going on when somebody is making a purchase decision. So the first thing they ask is, okay, like, do I literally have enough money in the bank that I can buy this thing? If I do, the next question is, well, do I feel like the benefit that I would get from this thing I'm buying is greater than what it would cost me? And those two questions, like, I'm not saying they're easy, but like relatively they're easy for you to answer. You could probably even like maybe like explicitly answer them. The really tough question comes when you get this kind of third order question. Okay, but like, will I be able to find something cheaper if I keep looking? And this is where you get into this trade-off of how long do you want to search for the optimal choice. There's actually even a whole mathematical branch around this. It's sometimes called the secretary problem or the multi-arm bandit problem. But to avoid having to go to a math professor every time you want to make a purchase, your brain is doing this fabulous work for you all the time as you go around everywhere in the world. It's paying attention to what things cost, and it's building up this secret price list, which is essentially what the average or median price of different items is. And these are called reference prices. And so what will happen now is, now that you want to make a purchase, so let's say I'm going to go buy a cup of coffee, my brain is going to look at the price of the coffee and compare it to what it knows coffee usually goes for, and wherever I am. And it's going to give me some information, like, hey, is this cheaper than coffee normally is? Is this the same? Is this hideously more expensive? And then based on that information, like, either I'll continue to shop for coffee or I'll go ahead and make my purchase. I describe this in a way that's very logical, like, oh, should I continue shopping? But the way that your brain gets you to do this isn't logical at all. It relies on emotions. If the price that you see is far below the reference price, you are going to feel very, very happy. Oh my God, it's so exciting. This is such a great deal. You will feel so happy that you will often go ahead and buy things you have zero need for just because they're such a good deal. On the other hand, if this price is a lot higher than the reference point, you're going to have a very negative emotion. And the negative emotion you're likely to have is actually anger. And there's actually a whole area of study around this about why this is that oftentimes the reference price, rather than just being descriptive of, oh, this is about the average price, it actually starts to take on moral tones, right? If you hear someone talking about the fair price for something, that's what they mean. And if something is the fair price for something and somebody else wants to charge more for it, now it's not just that it's more money than you want to spend. That person has actually broken the social contract. This is important when you're a product manager if you are lucky enough to work at a company that sticks around for a while, because at some point, you're going to need to raise your prices. And when you raise your prices, what will happen is your old price will be the reference price, and your new price will be the dick breaking the social contract move of pricing above. Now, internally, you're going to be having these debates about price elasticity and demand, and hey, but we really feel that we're giving so much value in the product, especially with inflation, that this makes sense. But the thing you have to recognize is, yes, all those things are in play. There is going to be a subset of the population that is just going to be so angry at you for raising prices in this very non-logical way that they will go ahead and hate cancel you. And I have a little hot tip for if you get in this situation, which is try, if you can, to separate out the moment when they find out that the price is going up from the moment that they actually have to pay it. The reason why you want to do that is you want them to have this emotional feeling of, unfair, divorced from now having to actually make a choice. Because if in that moment of, unfair, you say, cool, could I have some money now? They're much more likely to say no. On the other hand, if you say a month before you're going to raise prices, you tell everyone, hey, by the way, we're going to raise prices, and here's the reasons why we're planning to raise prices. If you justify it, people take it much better. By the time the month rolls around, not only has that first wash of emotion kind of gone away, but if you're lucky, the new price will have actually become the reference price. And then you don't need to worry about it anymore. So far, we've been talking about things, though, where your brain has a pretty good shot at having a reference price based on what's going on. But the truth is, we buy things all the time that we buy so infrequently, we have no idea. So think about how often do you buy a hammer? You might buy that twice in your life. Okay, so you don't know what a fair price is for a hammer. And this is where anchoring comes in. Anchoring is the process of deliberately trying to influence what the reference price is that somebody uses when evaluating a purchase decision or really any decision involving money. And one thing that is particularly effective because it anchors is strike-through pricing. You ever seen strike-through pricing? Actually, this is a screen grab from Amazon. Okay? Now, why is this so effective? Well, the particular product, I don't remember what it was, but it is not anything I've ever bought. And I have no idea. I think it was some microprocessor. I don't know. I don't know what that thing is supposed to be. So Amazon helpfully told me, it's supposed to cost $229, but we are going to give you an awesome deal, only $189. This technique is so effective that what you'll actually see is companies sometimes misuse it. So instead of, hey, calling out the fact that my item is on sale by doing this strike-through pricing, they won't put the item on sale. They'll create a fake higher price that they can strike through. I don't recommend this for a few reasons, starting with that it's pretty deeply unethical. But assuming you don't care about that, you still shouldn't do it. Because first, if your consumers find out about this, they will be pissed. And secondly, this is actually illegal in some markets. This is considered false advertising to make up this artificial list price that's not real. The other thing I want to call out about this is you may notice that here we have the exact amount off that you're saving as well as the percentage are listed here. The reason why you're seeing both those things is that there is a subset of consumers, predominantly men, who are most motivated by knowing the exact concrete amount of money that they are saving. And you can imagine that probably what's going on here is they're thinking about what else they could spend that money on, and then the utility of that other thing gets added to the utility of the purchase. There is another group of consumers, primarily women, who are much more motivated by the percentage off. And you can imagine that for this consumer, they're really focused on this idea of like, should I keep shopping or should I stop? And the percentage gives a really nice signal. How likely am I to find something cheaper if I keep going? If it's a really big percentage, nah, probably this is the best deal I can get, and I should go ahead. Now, this particular example, yes, there is potentially some manipulation about what the reference price should be, but at least we're talking about prices. But the really fun thing about your brain and anchoring is that your brain, in its desperate attempt to give you some kind of a reference, will sometimes mistake proximity for relevance. Now, let's say you are interviewing for a new job, things are going really well, and you're going in now for the negotiations. Okay, what's your salary going to be? And at the beginning, while you're chit-chatting with the recruiter, you mention offhand, oh, hey, did you hear? Honda had to recall 1.2 million cars. You have just anchored you and that recruiter on the number 1.2 million. Unless you're going for a C-suite job, what that probably means is that your total comp package is going to be higher than if you had ever mentioned that, which is crazy, right? Because the recruiter doesn't think that the number of cars that Honda recalled has to do with your market value. You don't think that, and yet magically by just saying a number near another number, somehow your brain is like, oh, those numbers, they connect, right? So as a product manager, the thing you want to think about then is, anytime you're going to be talking about price, you want to be really thoughtful about what other numbers you allow to be near the price, either on the page itself where the price is displayed, or in other places in your product. If you can figure out a way to have a big number right before the price, oftentimes there will be a mild anchoring against that number as the reference, and it'll make your product feel cheaper. And just the reverse if you do the opposite, right? If you have a small number right before your price, it can make your price feel worse. Again, anchoring is just one example of behavioral economics, and behavioral economics is awesome, and I love it, and it's like all these mind-bending things. But the thing that behavioral economics and regular economics cannot help you with is they cannot tell you, why is my user navigating my flow in the way that they are? Why are they dropping off here and not there? And for that, you need a whole different school of frameworks. One of my favorites is the user is drunk. I highly recommend Googling this one. This is not what we're going to talk about today, though. We're going to talk about something that I like to call the Kennedy principle, which is never ask your user to do for you what you could do for your user. The underlying principle here is that your user basically has like a gas tank of energy, okay? And every time you ask them to do something, you're using up some of that gas. So don't use the gas on stupid shit. Save it for the things you actually need it for. What do I mean by stupid shit? Okay, so let's say you're on a payment page, right? You're trying to buy something. Maybe it's an airline ticket because they have terrible checkout flows. Have you ever seen this where they're asking you, please put in your card type, and then you need, after that, you type in the credit card number? Well, speaking as someone who worked for years and years in e-commerce, the first 4 digits of your credit card encode the credit card type, okay? And yet, I have been on checkout flows where if I left that blank or I messed it up and I submit the page, it will fail. And now they ask me to go back and correct it, and sometimes they even clear out some of the fields that I filled out. Like, fuck you. I actually find it very ironic that the payment step in flows often has a lot of this like cruft on it that doesn't really serve a purpose other than creating friction for the user. So, we already talked about having to say what kind of credit card you have. And by the way, like, don't use radio buttons, like use buttons because they have better tap targets. But you'll also see things like this, right? So the idea here, which is not a bad one per se, is that the way the credit card numbers appear on your credit card is in these little groups of 4. And so to decrease the chance that someone fat fingers it, well, why don't we just break it up for them? Now, the problem is, well, like some websites, you actually have to tab between these. And other websites automatically move you. And you don't know which is a user. And so like, you end up doing this weird thing, and it's actually really easy to make a mistake. And then we get to my personal favorite, expiration date. So think about a credit card, OK? There's an expiration date, right? Like, it's 2 numbers. So why would the website ask me to put it in as the month name? Is it important to you that I should know that December is the 12th month for me to make a purchase? No, don't make people do math problems if you don't need to. And where this really often comes up too is when a user is moving down what I call an unhappy path. So an unhappy path means they're doing something that if they keep doing, they are not going to accomplish the thing that they want. They've taken a wrong turn. And your job now is to get them back on track. And you really want to do this pretty consistently, doing 4 things every time. You have to tell them that there's a problem, because they may not realize. You need to tell them how to fix the problem. You need to take them to the place they need to go to fix it. Don't leave it up to them. And then when it's fixed, you need to tell them that they have successfully fixed it. Now, we could go into lots of details on all these. I'm just going to touch right now on the tell them how to fix it. This is about your error messages. So don't make error messages like this. Great, this is an invalid email address. Why? Is it that you don't like the special character? Is it that somebody else already registered with it? Like, what's going on? I, as the end user, have no idea how to actually fix this problem. So I can tell you, when I worked at Netflix, in the sign-up flows there, like, people sometimes get confused about whether they already have an account. And this is particularly true for people who are rejoining, but they were a subscriber recently enough that we still have some data from them. So they would go to the registration step, and then they would try to register with an email address that we already know. And if the password that they put in there matched, like, great, we just like continue you on. But if the password didn't match, we were doing this super fun thing where we would say something like attempt failed and no explanation whatsoever about what's going wrong. The logic behind this came from InfoSec because they didn't want the black hats to know if they were like surfing around trying to figure out logins that we had that email address. But the thing is, if you're a bad guy, all you have to do is play around on the site a little bit to figure out, oh, that's what happens when you already know the email. So the only people getting trapped by this really bad error message were the legitimate users trying to sign up. So we changed the error message to say, there's already an account registered under this email. Click here to recover your password or try again. And when we did that, the people who had been getting this error message became 32% more likely to sign up than when we had our unclear, sorry, something went wrong. This is just one example of the way that I have made millions, I'm not exaggerating, millions of dollars for companies just by cleaning the cruft off the flows. Not changing substantively what the product does, but just making it easier to do. However, are you guys familiar with Steve Selzer? He used to work at Airbnb in design. So Steve has also made millions of dollars for companies by doing exactly the opposite, by deliberately inserting friction into flows. Okay, the lesson here is not that I'm wrong and Steve's right, or that I'm right and Steve's wrong. The lesson here is basically the fundamental thesis of this talk, which is there is no right. There is no one approach that you can take that is going to work every time. And that's why you need to have this whole set of things to draw from, and you need to apply judgment to ask yourself in any given situation, like, which framework do you think is the most likely to be right? So I want to exhort all of you to go out, be foxes, build up your Rolodex of frameworks, and if you don't mind my saying this, like, play the field a little when it comes to strategy. Thank you so much.